If Metroid Dread does anything masterfully out of the gate, it's conditioning the player according to what they need to know. The game puts the player in situations wherein they're given an opportunity to learn, and then put into practice, gameplay elements that are essential for their progression. These elements of Metroid Dread's game design as a whole are inseparably linked to the level, mechanical, visual, and sound designs, which we'll all dig into later. On a deeper level of design, however, 2D Metroid games are speedrunners games, always have been, and Metroid Dread is no exception. The game is designed in such a way to make certain routes or paths impossible, either because the area ends in a dead end, or because you don't have the correct tools to traverse that part of the world yet. But that's just what Mercury Steam wants you to think. Dread has been made not only with the understanding that people are going to try to break the game, but has been designed with sequence breaking in mind. This mindfulness is demonstrated most obviously during the Kraid fight, which is convenient for me because it's the one big fight in the game that I can talk about without it being a spoiler. Hidden in Kraid's boss room is a bomb block in the bottom left-hand corner. Breaking it reveals a launcher that will shunt Samus into the glowing hole in Kraid's stomach, providing the player a unique way to insta-kill the boss. This scenario can only play out if the player does several sequence breaks before finding Kraid, wherein you get the grapple beam early, use the grapple beam to break out of the Dairon Emi zone early, and restore power to the West Labs, which then allows the player to get the Morph Ball bomb early. The breaks only potentially snowball from there, as then you can access Berenia early, which means you can gain access to even more abilities earlier than seemingly intended. It's one thing for these skips and breaks to be theoretically possible or found out by the top 1% of players, but it's entirely another for Mercury Steam to have found them, design around them, and then reward players for excelling in their exploration and gameplay skills to the point that they can actually pull them off. Let's get the very few negatives out of the way: loading zones and unintuitive destructible walls. The loading screens, to be fair, look great. It's good that there isn't just a loading icon in the bottom corner with a black screen in the background. The elevator one in particular seems to be a callback to similar loading screens from Metroid Prime. However, there are some rare circumstances where you're going to travel to a new area for the first time, but won't have what you need to progress and need to go back. This is a good thing from the standpoint of Metroidvania design philosophy, as it results in the player finding a point of progression that they're going to want to return to after they get the necessary upgrades. Unfortunately, however, it also means that you're going to have to sit through multiple loading screens back to back, which murders the pacing. Secondly, there are entire sections of the game hidden behind breakable blocks that you have no way of knowing are breakable. One stands out beyond most others, and it's when you enter Cataris for the first time. Upon leaving the elevator, the player can proceed to the right, only to explore and find several dead ends which lead to areas with high heat and lava. Naturally, this will stand out as a point that you need to return to when you can traverse those areas with high heat after getting the Varia suit, and so you leave and go back to the area that you just came from in search of the upgrades you need. However, doing so can lead to a mistaken sense of being soft-locked, as there is no way to progress whatsoever if you go back to Arteria. The solution all along was to shoot the wall to the left of the elevator, which opens up the majority of the rest of Cataris, despite there being no reason for players to think about shooting it. The player can discover that it's breakable or that there's something behind it if they press themselves up against the wall, which will reveal an open space behind it. But this again requires the player to think to interact with something that is presumably uninteractable, even when there is something else in the room to interact with, being the elevator. This problem gets mitigated, if entirely done away with, once you acquire the Pulse Radar ability, which can even be sequence broken to get much earlier. Also, to the game's credit, shooting at dead ends almost always works, and you will eventually become conditioned to do this, but just because it works doesn't make it intuitive, especially for new players. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about what Metroid Dread's level design does right. A lot. The game does something important in that it manages to have nearly a dozen different areas that all look and feel distinct from one another while still believably being in the same planet or constructed by the same people. Areas unique, world cohesive. Is traversal fluid? Yes, except for the loading screens. The level of detail put into the level design of Dread is staggering. Each area has been built meticulously to not only accommodate the player based on what they are expected to have at their disposal when they first show up, but also based upon what the player will eventually unlock in both that area and others on return visits. Not to mention the mental gymnastics that must have been at play to design for sequence breaking not only to be expected, but deliberately planned. The level design is also one of the best educational tools used to teach the player on how to progress in the game. Anytime a new fundamental gameplay element is introduced, the world around you is designed in such a way that you will learn that new skill and immediately put it into practice. For example, you learn how to aim, then what breakable blocks look like, how to clamber, and how to wall jump. Then, you are put in a situation where in order to move forward, you need to aim, shoot the breakable blocks in order to clamber to a ledge, and then repeat the process a number of times in order to jump from wall to wall. Likewise, shortly after being taught how to counter, you'll encounter several enemies in the world that have more telegraphed attacks and don't deal a whole lot of damage. This allows you to practice what you just learned on everything in your way without punishing you too much for failure. This is then added upon when you encounter the first damaged enemy and are shown that you can counter them as well. This becomes one of your most invaluable survival tools, as it's the only way to deal with an enemy that will otherwise insta-kill you. Mercury Steam has managed to advance their level design to such a degree that it goes beyond simply having levels to beat and a world to build, as the levels themselves become puzzles and challenges to be overcome in and of themselves. In my playthroughs of Dread, I never experienced any significant glitches that I can recall or see in footage. The frame rate can often drop during loading screens between areas, but let's be fair here, it's a loading screen. What does lose the game a tick for stability, however, is the bizarre transition problem from the rest of the world into a boss or mini-boss room. While the game can manage to transition seamlessly from gameplay into cutscenes, it doesn't seem to be able to do the same for a boss, as the screen hard cuts to black when entering the room. This also tends to ruin any surprise that mini-bosses might have had, as after this happens enough times, you simply know what's coming next. Hey there! Watching to this point in the video means you're way more likely to watch the whole thing, so collect your 100%, subscribe if you like these breakdowns, and of course, beware spoilers from this point forward. Dread takes the story of Metroid in one of the only logical paths forward after the end of Metroid Fusion, exploring the fact that Samus is theoretically now the only living thing in the galaxy with Metroid DNA. This is the main impetus for why the game happens. Ravenbeak, the leader of the renegade Malkin Chozo warrior tribe, leaks an image of a living X-parasite in order to lure in Samus, the only one immune to the X, to investigate. Once there, he confronts and defeats Samus quickly, trapping her deep within the planet before attempting to either harvest her DNA or make her join the Malkin by force. These confrontations pay off at the end of the game in a way that both satisfies the events of Fusion and the main plot point of Samus being part Metroid. Her trials push her biological limits, and the result in her fusion with the baby Metroid finally manifests in the form of her gaining Metroid abilities, such as their trademark energy absorption. A physiological change which brings about the ironic end to Ravenbeak, who, in his hubris, created the warrior he had always dreamed of, only to finally be destroyed by her. The game also has a uniquely good thing going for it, the fact that it's one of only 2 Metroid games with a very good reason for Samus to have lost all of her prior games' abilities. She lost her initial duel with the one who made her suit in the first place, and he removed its functionality in a bid to either test or harvest her. Unfortunately, however, the game also has a rather paradoxical show-don't-tell problem. Despite it being a game that conveys so much to the player through visuals and level design, it has a nasty habit of giving massive exposition dumps. The game also struggles, on rare occasion, with its theming, the theme being obviously dread. While the actual gameplay does a lot of work to make the player feel that titular sense of dread, specifically anytime that you enter an Emmy room and especially when entering the last 2, it also makes the rookie mistake of constantly telling the player how they're supposed to feel. Adam is Samus's tactical AI modeled after her late commanding officer, and the same one present in Metroid Fusion. It is implied immediately prior to the fight with Ravenbeak that he had taken control over Adam's transmissions, and that he was actually the one talking to you for an unknown period of the game. This would make sense as a mode of psychological warfare, constantly demeaning and belittling Samus in offhanded ways to make her feel less powerful or confident in her own survival. This also does come to a cathartic end when Samus finally catches on to the ploy and destroys the transmission in defiance, affirming her internal character. This does not, however, nullify the fact that you, the player, are essentially told, hey, you're supposed to feel hopeless. Do you feel hopeless yet? Boy, this sure is hopeless. Several times over.
You were no match for him then. You are no match for him now. There is a very low probability of success in standing against him now. You have no means to confront that. You would not be a worthy adversary for him, not even at full power. You are faced with overwhelming power. Accept your helplessness.
The mechanics of Metroid Dread are extremely tight and polished by necessity. As previously mentioned, this is a game that was made in such a way that it was designed to be broken by the best of players, while also giving newer players the tools they need to succeed against mounting odds. Most notably, the Aeon abilities are back from Mercury Steam's previous Metroid outing, Samus Returns. It acts in the form of a gauge that automatically fills when not in use, and is consumed at various rates based upon the type ability being used. The Pulse Radar is back and functions almost exactly the same way that it did in Samus Returns, highlighting blocks that can be interacted with or destroyed, although this ability is both the last one to be found and is technically unnecessary, with its greatest use being to help players to find unlockables in the endgame or compensate for getting stuck or soft-locked. The Phantom Cloak allows the players to turn invisible at the cost of walking very slowly and can potentially consume your health, but it does prevent detection from most enemies, including the Emmy. And lastly, the Flash Shift allows Samus to rapidly dash up to 3 times laterally. This will be the movement option that will almost always end up being used the most, as it makes traversal much faster, enables sequence breaks if you're good, and can be used to quickly maneuver in combat. These aside, however, staples of Metroid like Super and Ice Missiles, the Grapple Beam, Screw Attack, and Shine Spark all make their returns. As mentioned in an earlier section, the level design of the game teaches the player how to use its unique mechanics and rewards players who master those mechanics as quickly as possible. But where the level design informs the player on how to use its mechanics, the mechanical design of the game informs the player on how to progress through the levels. This kind of design philosophy is key to any good Metroidvania game. You find an object in the world that you can't interact with yet because you simply lack the tools or necessary skills, and so you make a mental note on what and where that was. Then, when you find the thing that lets you progress, you remember all of those times that stopped you when the world opens up. And beyond simply applying the mechanics in the obvious way that they're intended to be, like the examples I just mentioned, mastery of those mechanics truly opens up the world to the player and the imagination to what is possible. The game foreshadows important areas of the map and even bosses in advance without any sort of audio logs, reading materials, or cutscenes, literally just in the backgrounds as discovered by the player organically. The visual and sound design contribute most highly to how the game communicates the situation of the world building to the player, especially in the case of the bosses. The game does this throughout, with great examples being that Corpius can be seen cloaking in the background multiple times before you actually fight it. In the lower portions of Cataris, Kraid can be heard roaring louder and louder as you get closer to where he's in prison, and Experiment Z57 can be seen twitching even when the power is out, implying that it's still alive or that its body is still functional in some way, moving around much more after the lights and machines are turned on, but then is missing entirely once the magma generator has been shut down. There are even Chozo warriors that can be seen running ahead of you in the background in areas to later head you off for multiple mini-boss fights. Also, because it feels very weird to not address the bosses that cover the box art, while the Emmy aren't particularly scary in their design, the constant beeping reminds you that they're always looking for you, always watching, and they will find you. And when they do, well, it does very much add to the sense of dread that you get from the moment you enter one of their areas. I think I have a problem, because every time I play this game, be it before or now, I get better and I pull off more and more nutty stuff, easier and easier, and I think, dude, I'm godlike, this game is so sick. But then I beat it, and I feel weirdly kinda underwhelmed, like I don't really feel like playing it again. It's weird. I've said that a bunch. Weird doesn't sound like a word anymore. Because I'll be admiring how intentionally this game was made, how intelligently the levels were designed, and how everything kind of teaches you how to play the game just by being there and how everything gets foreshadowed, but then I'm just like, why were those blocks destructible and not anything else around them? How was I supposed to know that? Sometimes it can feel like I was just progressing on accident, or like it needed the crutch of the pulse radar in some rooms. Because otherwise, the only way to discover anything is just to shoot literally every block in every room and hope that something happens. But despite that, it's really odd for me to say that I got so frustrated with the game and still come out of it thinking, dude, this game is awesome. 10 out of 10 opinion score. Do recommend buy Metroid Dread. But also, screw the Dairon Emmy. You suck. You threatened to make a game with awesome movement, great level design, huge lore, and the game that canonized Samus's final smash that I have been waiting 16 years for, unfun. Do you have any idea how hard that is to do? Okay, I said 16 years, then I fact-checked myself, 19. Fusion came out in 2002. Dread came out in 2021, and I'm making this review in 2023. People born in 2002 can drink in 2023. I'm so ancient. But enough about what I think. Is the game actually good? Thank you guys so much for watching, and man, I guess no amount of development hell could keep this game down. Now we just have to hope the same is true for Prime 4 and all will be right in the galaxy. But until then, I've been LoneWolfEX, and I will see you, yes you, next time.